My name is Pim, and I'm on a quest. I'm on a quest for years already, with little success. But I'm hoping that with the advent of AI, of artificial intelligence, we also get some more attention for actual natural intelligence, so that we can build software for humans. That's right. In this ever more digital age, my quest is to go all the way back to people in interactions over processes and tools. Now you might ask, why am I on this quest? That all began a long time ago. It was a dark and rainy night, and I just made a lot of mistakes in my career. I've had a lot of poor interactions with people, a lot of moments where I thought I was being really, really clever. And it turns out that maybe other people were very clever as well, and they might have had something to say, but I didn't want to listen to it. So I'm hoping that I can share some of my pain, so that you might experience the same benefits, but with less pain. Isn't that nice? So my mission is to pay it forward and hopefully give you something cheaper than I got. So today's topic, it sounds very technical at the outset, but I assure you, deep down there is a human component after all. Now let's see if this one will. Where would it? With that one. Ah, there we go. My mission, my daily mission, and I'm sure that's true for many of you, is to work with less paper. Make people work with less paper. I took out a DALI subscription just for this presentation, and I figured to set the scene, I'll ask DALI for a nice overview before we had computers and when we still had a lot of paper. So I asked DALI, please give me a 1950s detective noir, but in color, office building with lots of paper and some telephones. I actually have a couple of versions where there's way more telephones, and every time I asked it for fewer telephones, I got more telephones. So this is just the first one, and the rest one I hid carefully and dare not look at again. Now, the idea, of course, of software is that we can do things quicker with fewer human interactions, and get stuff done, hopefully with less paper as well. So we'll look at a bit of an example. Our subject for today is a very simple block of code. All it does is synchronize some product information between two systems. I think most of us will have built something similar at some point in our career. Everybody's of course built their CMS, but that's a boring subject, so we'll look at something else. So a first iteration for a system could be something like this. Excuse me, you'll hear that a couple of times more. What our report function should do is it should find all products whose stock and price haven't been reported recently. It should report them to the external service, and it should mark them as reported. That's pretty sensible, right? We'll use a very standard, simple solution for it, and this being, of course, the Laravel Eindhoven Meetup even. We'll use a bit of Laravel. I'm not a native Laravel developer per se, but all my colleagues work with Laravel, so I figure we'll just use that one. If I ever use an inferior pattern, do call me out, but don't hold it against me. It's just to set the scene and get something going for a start. Is there anything that catches your eye on this first version? Let's make it a bit of an interactive session, otherwise it's all boring. Any opinions, any things you like or dislike in particular?
There's no return.
It has no return, no, it's a void function. What would you return?
Yeah, if you want to report, you want to know if it succeeded, right? Or not?
If it didn't crash, it succeeded?
Yeah.
It does, in that sense, report a little bit, because it does update some status on our side.
Okay.
But that's an interesting point. So just a couple of things to call out. Let's see if this works. Can I point at things? How does that? No. Static access. Advantages, disadvantages. Uses a cursor. That's really nice. That means we can deal with batches and sizes and things like that. It's a very oddly specific call to some client function. Just a couple of scalars in there. Upsides, downsides. Again, it does take into account that the connection might be down, but it just catches a generic exception. Upsides, downsides. Um, yeah, some things we can have an opinion on. What tests should we have to gain a bit of confidence that this thing does what it should be doing? What scenario should we be thinking about?
All products get reported.
All products get reported.
Non-products get reported.
There are products, but we don't have to report on them. Any other scenario we should be testing? Any other branch to this code?
There are no products to report.
There are no products to report. Yeah, might not be the most interesting case, but
No.
perhaps. I think that might be covered by there are products, but they're not to be reported on. What about this one?
Part of the products is reported because someone crashed.
Could you repeat that one?
And then a part of the products are reported because then you get an exception.
Yes. You want to make sure that we can deal with either incomplete state or at least at the very least that if the client goes down at some point that we don't pass that on to the user or whatever. Cool. That's the three scenarios I had in mind as well. The first one being let's make sure that we can get for some products something reported. I think this is a pretty typical test case as well, so you've probably seen something like this at some point. Are there people here who don't usually write tests? No judgment. Are there people here who write tests for everything? Who writes tests for, say, 60% of their 50%, 25%? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Everybody use PHP unit or are people using Pest? Pest? Something else? Bhat? PHPT? How do we feel about this? Expects this once. What does that mean? So expects this once means we expect that method to be called exactly one time. That means we turn this mock object, this stub object, mock object, we turn this stub object into a mock object. And that means that this code now also does assertions, which you normally only do at the end. Becomes a little bit difficult. Again, upsides, downsides. Choices, right? Is that a good idea or not? Yeah, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Same for the next one. Let's say that we expect this method to never be called in the instance that there are products, but they shouldn't be reported on. Again, upsides, downsides. Maybe you would have something else in mind in which you could test this, maybe not. Are we starting to get a little bit of a sense for the problem space? Yeah, a little bit familiar with it. Good. So finally, for the exceptional case, we expect that if we call this method once and it throws an exception, then we expect that that exception gets thrown into some nicer exception. Fair enough so far? Everybody following along? Any questions so far? Okay, I've got one final question for you. Should we mark the function with a dot block that it throws that exception? Yes or no? Is that a good thing to do or not?
It depends.
It depends is not a good answer. Come on. It's not 2019 anymore, you don't get bonus points for that one. No, I'm sorry. It depends on? What does it depend on?
If there is no bonus point, then.
Yeah. No, if you have actual reasons, you do get bonus points. You'll get a free beer afterwards. Okay, what? I shouldn't make promises I can't come. Now, what would be a good reason to do this? What would be a good reason not to do this? Any ideas?
The static analysis complaints.
Yeah, of course.
Document generation.
Document generation, definitely. Definitely. Yeah. So there's something weird with this kind of stuff going on. Of course, PHP of recent years has worked on many features that help us to reduce or even eliminate our dot blocks. We've got a lot of static typing and return values and all that kind of stuff. Lots of cool features. Advantages, disadvantages. What's the advantage of doing something like this? Well, you can retrieve it in all kinds of circumstances, and one of those circumstances is while you're working on it and you call this function, you actually get squiggly lines in your editor that say you are calling a function, that function might throw an exception, and you haven't caught it yet. Doesn't that feel a bit like a missing language feature? Do we have any Java programmers in the room? So you know checked exceptions.
Yes.
Yeah. What do you think? Good idea?
No, I don't like it.
Why not?
Because usually you don't want to. I don't want to catch them. I want to catch them later on.
Mm.
So then you have to say I'm throwing this exception, and you're
Yeah.
making your inner workings exposed on the outside. So it doesn't work
Yeah.
that well.
Yeah. You're forced.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the language takes a choice. So for those who don't know, Java actually has two base exception types. One that you can freely throw and ignore, and one that you have to catch. The compiler will not let you not catch it. So is that a good idea or a bad idea? Well, let's look at it from a slightly different perspective. Of course, I had to get another Dali picture in. Let's imagine that cars aren't right. You instantly spotted it.
They're on the same.
It could be a One Direction road.
It could be,
Yeah.
but you know, it's AI, so it has to do something funky. So if we imagine our beautiful function as an office building, very nice office building, good neighborhood, cars only going one way, it's very fancy. And our office building has this wonderful Art Deco revolving door. You could always imagine that getting info into this function and getting data back out is like going through that revolving door. We've got our parameters, we've got our return values. And then the exceptions is kind of like, yeah, just use the side exit. It's a little bit weird. So we'll keep this into the back of our minds. We'll come back to this. So one thing I like very much, I have to mention this in almost every presentation I can get it into. There's a feature by default enabled in past, but you can call PHP unit with the test docs option, -- test docs. And you actually get this output. And what's so wonderful about this output, you get this output, I mean. What's so wonderful about that output is that you almost have like a self-documenting what are the capabilities of my system. So your tests will actually show, oh, so what does stock report do? Well, it reports on stock and price and updates the last reported at. It reports nothing when all the products are recently reported, and it shuts down on client error. That's a really apt description of what this thing does. So if you have a good set of test case and a good naming approach to those test cases, we almost get a little bit of like a self-describing bit of documentation. It's not the main subject. If you want a very interesting talk on this one, it's the very challenging named gentleman Kevlin Henny, but YouTube will suggest it for you. Great talk, structure and interpretation of test cases, not for today.
Great speaker as well. And any talk on him.
He is Mr. Language. He is really into language. And of course, you know, being programmers, we do spend an enormous amount of time communicating, usually through ourselves 6 months from now, but often through teammates as well. So communication, using language appropriately is very important. But not for today. Cool, we've got our function. This is our subject for today. Now, for who in the room is this more or less average what you would find in your day job? For other people for who this is way worse than what you would normally encounter? Nice. Other people for who this is better than what you would normally encounter? Yeah, just depends a little bit. Nice. Can you think of a situation in which having code like this is pretty bad?
Huge amount of products with that case.
Yeah, but this cursor. So this is a built-in batching mechanism. So it will just batch for a while and it will just keep running. It won't memory leak or anything. It'll just keep running. And it tracks its progress. So you can just shut it down and restart it.
It stops on the first error. It doesn't matter what kind of error.
Yeah. Yeah. So there is no distinction between is there a connection error or is there something wrong with a particular product?
Yes.
Yeah. Definitely.
It updates state even if there's an issue.
It updates state even if there's an issue.
Yeah.
How so? I don't think it does.
it only updates state when it was successful for a product. If the next one fails, then it doesn't. So it's
Yes,
correct.
so one thing you could say, this is always interesting in distributed systems as well, this guarantees at least once delivery, but it doesn't guarantee exactly once delivery. So if this calls and then crashes, it will call again and crash and call again and crash. So it might get stuck at a single product if there is a 500 on the other end.
Yeah.
Typically speaking though, this kind of code is written with particular goal in mind. And this kind of code starts to become problematic when you just have a lot of code like this. And that's because the nature of this code, as you could see from the test that we've written, this code doesn't lend itself very well to isolated testing. So in order to have a lot of this code, you need a lot of integration tests or a lot of database tests. And your test suite just starts running very slow or taking a lot of time to complete. So if we look at it from that perspective, who was this code written for? It was written for the writer. Someone had to get this out the door. That's what it's optimized for, you could say. Does that make sense when I say it like that? Yeah, I see some people disagreeing. This is a good point to disagree with me and have another opinion. Because I will be building on this.
Not really disagreeing, but sort of thinking about it and
Yeah.
it can be. Yeah.
There might be multiple reasons why. For example, people might just not know better. That still means it's optimized for writing. It's just not like there would have been another way.
Maybe a stupid question, but I never like to put functions in a function call in a for each loop.
Yeah.
Like, is that general practice or standard practice or not?
Like,
Normally I would just call $sign $P, for example, is product not recently reported cursor, and then start a for each loop.
yeah,
Or like not, or at least not use the function in the.
it's real estate for presentations.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's a good call out.
From a technical point of view, it doesn't matter.
So it's even faster. This is even faster than when
No,
you.
not anymore.
No?
No.
Okay.
PHP will notice that you're not using the variable any further and will resolve that.
But for me, it simply means like I have to balance the font size and things like that on the presentation.
Okay.
Especially additional lines just cost.
Mhm.
So I try to just keep things a little bit brief.
Mhm.
But yeah. So the point that I'm trying to make, this kind of code, it lends itself to being integration tested, to being database tested. And that means that you pay for it in terms of test suite execution. So it's optimized for one thing, and you pay for it in another way. So what I'm trying to say is it's all trade-offs. Optimizing for one thing, it will lead to cost somewhere else. Of course, optimizing for nothing makes everyone equally unhappy, which is always a great way to introduce compromise. But the code that we looked at, I think it was optimized for writing it. And there's not many tricks that we could do to optimize it even further for that instance. Have you ever looked at your own work like this and made a conscious choice on what to optimize for? As your career and your development progress naturally to optimize for different things over time?
And different products.
And different products?
Some products have to be speedy, some
Yeah.
products have to be
Yeah.
trustworthy.
Who has worked in significantly different industries? Yeah? Can you give me some examples? Like what's the biggest let's have a little competition. What's the biggest difference anyone has experienced? Has anyone worked in banking or financial transactions or anything like that? Yeah. It's probably
I worked for a company that makes invoicing software.
yeah.
And, yeah.
Yeah.
It should be all very secure and
You've probably encountered rounding errors.
well, the funny thing is there is no single unit test written there. Even if I tell you that every new installation is a complete copy of the code base and a bug fix will be rolled out in like 5 hours with a script on the server through all the directories with all the customers, it's really, it was like 50 years old code.
Yeah.
So there was no testing, nothing. It was all done by, and I was really surprised with it.
I imagine. Yeah.
And it's a famous product. I mean, it's just saw an advertisement on television.
Yeah.
They even have that on.
So we'll spend the rest of the evening guessing which one it is. Yeah.
It's made nearby. So.
Interesting. Thanks for sharing that. Is there anyone else who wants to share an experience?
Processing a JSON response from an external server that dumped it, and the JSON file was probably 2 or 3 gigs.
Ah.
A previous developer developed something that just parsed the entire JSON in test server, and that obviously worked. But the first time we tried it in a production environment, that obviously failed. So that requires some fancy parsing of JSON on the fly instead of just pushing it through a standard method. That was fun.
That was fun. I bet it was. Yeah. So this approach that we looked at, the trade-off that we get for writing it quickly is we end up with a slow test suite. So, do we have any ideas on what we could do to separate out the database from that code that we just saw?
Dependency injection.
Dependency injection, yeah, of course.
Message bus. Some sort of message bus.
Message bus, definitely. We'll look at dependency injection though.
Yeah, no, it's
So, if you look for mocking models do you know why, by the way, in AI pictures you never get proper words?
Yeah.
I thought at first that AI is just not really capable yet, but they do this on purpose. So you can't actually generate documents.
Okay.
Yeah, they do it on purpose. You can still kind of see what I was going for. But if you Google, this is like Google in the 50s, of course, you have to do a written request to the search department. If you look for how to mock models in Laravel, you get very interesting results. You get a couple of results and all of them follow the same pattern. The first one says, you can do it like this. The second response always says, no, you can't actually do it like that. That's entirely wrong, and by the way, you should do integration or database testing. And the third response always say, here's a very hacky, very crude way of doing it, and it probably actually works, but at what cost? Of course, instead of mocking the model itself, what you could do is the way that you could solve any problem in IT, and that is to just add another layer of interaction. Everyone heard this one before. So this is what you could do, for example, just put a repository or some similar pattern in between. So that would be dependency injection, as was suggested. Does anyone know the difference between dependency injection and dependency injection containers? Is this dependency injection or dependency injection container? Or both?
container.
It's container, but is it in dependency injection as well?
Yeah, you inject the container in the function,
Yeah.
Yeah,
but it's more like a locator.
it's a service.
It's a service
locator.
location.
Yeah.
10 points for knowing service location. At my previous company, we used to call this the suppository pattern. Just shove in and just get out from it what you want.
It's better than not using nothing at all, but it's still not good.
What's the downside of this approach? Of injecting the container and then getting out of it what you want?
Nobody knows what dependencies you need to inject to test
Exactly.
it. You need a complete container to inject to
Yeah.
test it.
Yeah, we'll get back to this again, but this is a very important point. Using this approach, you cannot actually see what the code does without inspecting the code itself. Which again, upsides and downsides. Is it super important to know the difference between DI and DIC and service location, etc.? No, of course, it's not super important to know that. But knowing your patterns, there are benefits to it, because sometimes history repeats itself because we tend to forget who came before us. Anyway, back to where we were. We could replace the static access to the model with an injected repository. The downside of that is it's another layer of interaction, but the advantage of this is we can now also mock this repository, and we don't have to write database tests for this anymore. We don't have to write integration tests. We can use pure unit tests for this. pure unit tests way faster than database tests. So there we go.
And you probably got a bug which you didn't find with your previous tests.
Which was?
The last reported at date. In the first tests, you don't know if you saved before you set the date or after you set the date.
Check on the date was not in the unit test.
Ah.
But
Checking
even
the,
if you
checking the
added
date
it,
was, but checking the save wasn't.
but even if you checked if the save was called, you don't know if it was saved before you set the date or after. And now
Ah.
you can check in the
You
repository.
did a refresh, so it reloads the data
Yeah,
from
but
the
if
database.
you go back,
Yeah,
Can
no,
you
but
go
that's actually a really good one. I think I know what you mean.
it's a common error if you need to do these kind of tests.
Yeah. Yeah.
In the test, if you
This one. Yeah, no,
No, you
unfortunately.
did
I did a refresh.
You did a refresh.
Haha, I'm sorry.
It reloads the data from the database.
Yeah, but that was,
but now you don't have to check if it's saved.
yes, because I did a refresh.
Yeah.
The refresh says, get the data from the database anew.
But you are gonna get field tests sporadically.
Yeah, because of the
The se- because of seconds splitting and moving. If the
Yeah.
seconds jumps at the right moment
Yeah.
or the wrong moment,
Yeah.
you get a field test.
That's definitely true. But this was very sharp. Very sharp. Unfortunately, not in this case, but definitely very sharp. Let's see, where were we? We were here. So we just, with this approach, we don't need database tests anymore. We can use pure unit tests. Do we still need integration tests? Is that still a good idea?
On the repository class.
On the whole thing? Should we test the whole thing works? Or are we happy with just unit tests?
I would be happy.
I think I would also be happy. I don't think we need unit integration tests. No.
Just an integration test on the repository class that does work, then I would be happy.
I think sometimes it's really good though to test that the whole thing works.
Yeah.
Under some circumstances. Sometimes.
AI is amazing.
Yeah. If only we had actual eye.
It's also AI.
It's also AI.
Actual AI.
Actual intent.
Saved
Which is your favorite? The Zape?
with the save.
So,
It's unbelievably stupid.
I always like I always like imagining myself in these scenarios where I created something like this, and especially like the covered one. That's the one that gets me. That one would happen to me. It's like I'm installing all these separate things, and I'm done, and I try to close the door, and it won't close, and I'm like, oh, this is my life. Having some integration tests, I think it's a really good idea. I'm a confidence-oriented developer. I hate saying yes or maybe or I think so. I just want to have like a full confidence, yes it works. So I'm a big fan of having an integration test in there as well. So my preferred approach would be to say I've got my unit test to verify that the behavior of the various components is accurate, and I've got my integration test to say the whole thing comes together. Has anyone ever heard of mutation testing? It's definitely something to try out at some point if you haven't used it yet. I won't go into it here, but if you want full confidence that your test suite is doing what it should be doing, then that's a great tool to use.
For me, it's reduced the amount of tests I write.
Yes.
It will save you time because your tests, the amount of tests can go down because mutation testing will find stuff and stuff.
Yeah.
So it isn't extra work. At least for me, it isn't.
Yeah, I see that. Cool. So for the integration test, we don't actually have to change that much. We don't have to have expectations in mocked clients or anything anymore. All we want is to have the whole thing come together and not crash on us. And for correct outcomes, of course, we've got unit tests. For the unit test though, we now actually have to mock the whole repository as well. Earlier this was just a line where we said we have a product and the product just uses the create factory method that will also save it to the database. Instead now we have to make it and then we still have an isolated subject unit test. That is very nice, but now we've got a bit of setup running out of hand. Why is this setup running out of hand? There's just too much wiring. There's too many things that need to come together. So mocking, it's useful, but it does increase the amount of setup that we have to do. So how can we fix this?
If you had another method that takes a single product and reports it, you can test that one instead of needing a repository.
Here, you can do the rest. I've given this presentation a couple of times now, and only once have people suggested to use builder methods, which I expected people would say all the time, because I've done workshops on unit testing years ago, and everyone all the time was like, I've copied and pasted the test twice, I can't stand this anymore, I'm gonna create builder methods. Whereas like that's not your problem, it's your symptom, but it's not your problem. I had a keynote presentation planned before certain events. I was never going to get a keynote anywhere, but I figure I'll just try and suggest a keynote. It was going to be about pain and discomfort. I won't do the whole keynote here, but there is one important aspect for the purpose of this discussion that I want to give you, and that there's two kinds of discomfort for the purpose of this discussion. There is discomfort that you could call immediate feedback. So the thing that you're trying to do, it's not working, so stop doing it. This is usually very sharp pain. So if you lean on a sprained ankle, for example, or if you have a cut somewhere and you get a bit of sweat in it, like oof, I didn't even know I had a cut there, and ow. Or if your hand's on fire. This was not what I asked for, but this is what I got. It's sharp, immediate feedback, stop what you're doing. But the second kind of discomfort is a little bit more nuanced. It's telling you that it's not like any specific thing that you're doing right now, but the path that you're on is not working out for you. So one or more of the choices that you've made maybe some time ago, it's not working out for you. And this kind of discomfort will creep up on you like boredom, anxiety, irritation, anger, even depression. It's important to know that if you're experiencing sharp pain or if you're experiencing dull pain, they need different remediation strategies. So things like what we were seeing before was dull pain. So it needs a different approach than a quick fix. So depending on which pain you're experiencing, you need a different approach to resolve it. You can take aspirin for a pain that you have somewhere, but it's only going to dull it. It's not going to take the pain away. If you want to actually get the problem fixed, you need to actually fix it and not just take an aspirin. So what's the cause of our pain? What is causing us to have to mock? So if you remember when we talked about buildings and functions and going through the front door, let's revisit that again. When a function executes, it takes in a list of parameters, it produces a return value, it might throw an exception. Exceptions, very interesting, but not what I'm trying to say right now. Our code actually does a bit more than just this. Our code also does this. What are these two blue arrows?
Repository getting the products and the client being called to report.
Yes. Side effects and pulling in context. Excellent. Something is coming in and out, but not through the front door. If we imagine the building, it's like jumping out the window or something like that. Maybe that's where the analogy starts to break down. But our function is not just taking in data and sending a return value, it's actually pulling in more data and it's sending it out through other means as well. So what does this mean for us? Generally speaking, software engineering is really, really simple if you just remember that every app on every level, what it does is it first tries to take what you put in it and see, can I understand what you're trying to say? Are you speaking, sprechen Sie language to me? Are you speaking gibberish or are you telling me something? That's syntactic. Once that stage is okay, we're past, this is the stage for value objects, things like that. Once that stage is passed, the system will evaluate what you're trying to say against its current context. That's where it becomes semantical. Yes, you say words to me, but does it mean something? So Are you trying to get me to report on products, or are you trying to get me to report on cauliflower? Does it make sense? And thirdly, once all that is done, the system does something, makes an update, sends out whatever, and goes on. These first two, this is where typically speaking, we usually use exceptions, but we could question, is that the right mechanism? Because it's not exceptional what's happening here. We get in a string, that string might not be an email address. Well, it's perfectly logical that we don't always get an email address, even if we require an email address. So is that exceptional? Probably not. Same thing here, yes, you're trying to delete a user, but user 2 doesn't exist. That's not that exceptional. You're trying to send out a message to another system, the connection is down, that's exceptional. But that's not what I'm trying to say today. You can try and break from this pattern. Usually that will not work out for you so well. With this model in mind, what's happening? When we identified that we were loading products into the repository, we correctly identified that static access, that caused us test pain. That caused us to have to do something in order to set up our system for that test to execute. But what we didn't realize at the time is that it wasn't the technical approach that was causing that pain, it was the entire concept. The entire concept of pulling in data that was causing us testing pain. So we've replaced one symptom with a different symptom. So this loop that we have is concerned with a bit of action, but the outer side of the loop, the innards of the loop are concerned with action. The loop itself, that part, is concerned with pulling in context. So what if we separate out the two, as suggested by the gentleman? Very good. By taking that part out, we separate the concerns of persistence, of context, with the concerns of action, and our test suite would look like this. We've traded some test complexity and local file complexity against now having multiple files and multiple tests. Any particular space is simpler, but the overall is a little bit more complicated. And of course the tests still run as fast as they can, and the setup of each test is now very simple. What's this approach called? What is this principle called that we've applied here? 10 points. You're a very smart audience. This is solid. This is the single responsibility principle. It's not a very popular principle anymore for all kinds of reasons. In part because the author is not that popular anymore, in part because people think it's not a useful thing, it's a behind the times thing. I think it's just a poorly understood principle. Stupidly enough, I think the only one that people really understand is the worst named one, the Liskov substitution principle. Does anyone have any concerns with the single responsibility principle? Anything that you don't like about it?
But I do have one thing that I don't like about it is somebody really goes into too much detail. Like that every function becomes one line basically.
Yeah, that is nice. That is actually one of my 3 problems with it. What is single?
Yeah.
What is a responsibility? What even is a principle? Single, does that mean if I have more than one line, I'm doing more things? Responsibility is doing the one-liner responsibility, or is the whole thing one responsibility? Isn't the whole system working a responsibility? You can have all kinds of discussions about this. What even is a principle? Does that mean I have to do it all the time, or does it mean it's more like guidelines than actual rules? Like, so, nice. Solid is a really great tool to have. The single responsibility, it's a great tool to have in your toolkit. But you have to understand it in its proper use, in its proper context. One thing that it's very important to understand about Solid in its entirety is that code that is solid is not necessarily good, but code that is not solid will suffer from certain symptoms. You might not mind those symptoms, and then your code is fine. And if you don't want those symptoms, then it's a tool that can help you to not have those symptoms. But it's not an easy tool to use. Now, fortunately, I have another tool for you. That tool has a slightly more difficult name, because why wouldn't it? But it's simpler to use. It's called the Integration Operation Segregation Principle. Has anyone heard of that? That's one for Scrabble. Integration operation segment. So there was something funny about extracting that whole persistence bit from our code. Yes, it was a good first step, but it wasn't the correct step, as we've already seen. So what's happening? This code has a different problem that comes back with processing, as we've seen. It wants to do too much itself, so that leads to mocking and all kinds of different problems. So single responsibility principle, we could use it to identify problems and everything, but then we can have a lot of discussion, a lot of debates. Has anyone ever had a productive discussion about is this single responsibility principle or not? Has anyone ever had an unproductive discussion on that? Yeah. So here's a different view. The integration operation segregation principle says code integrates or operates. If you mix the two, you're set up for growth, and you will have some other symptoms. So what's an integration? What's an operation? Succinctly put, an integration is calling a function that you wrote, and an operation is any statement that's not an integration. So in our instance, these are code that we wrote. These are integrations. And this one is clearly just something simple. That's an operation. The other one, I'm not sure. Maybe we'll revisit that one again. If you want to read more on this one, I think this whole principle is his crusade, Ralph Westphal. I don't think it's as popular as maybe it should be, but it's a very useful thing. What was I going to say? Yeah, something about trade-offs. Do we have any car people in the room? Anyone who likes cars? Yeah, a little bit. What car is this?
Looks like a BMW.
Which one? Bonus points if you get it.
5200.
Nah.
Is that something?
It's from the 1950s.
C1.
Yeah. Did you say? Yeah, nice. Yeah, it's this one. I asked ChatGPT and it said, or I asked DALI, and it said, I can't do that for you because the car wasn't there at the time, but I can generate something similar. So this car is a
Z3.
Z3. A Z3, convertible of course. I've had this car for a couple of years. It was great fun, but we didn't use it as much as we should have. But it was nice to have for a while. But we sold it. My friend has this car. What's this one?
Something.
Corvette.
Corvette, which one?
CR4.
Yeah, C4, very good.
C4.
This is a Corvette C4. This is a 1994 one. My friend has a 1991. He still has it. He actually took it apart entirely and put it back together just to do a bit of maintenance on it. Bonkers. Bonkers.
It still works.
Yeah.
And then you leave
How
with
many
one
parts
screw.
Yeah. It's like,
Yeah,
how bad could it be? Boom.
IKEA ID.
Which car's better?
Left.
Why?
It depends.
It's German. That's American.
Yeah.
It's German. Oh,
That's
I'll
American.
I'll have some more for you on that one. Actually, it's pretty hard to compare the two because if you get the nice version of both, they're actually quite equal. About the same power, about the same slurpage. They're both convertibles. Like there's a lot of similarities between the two.
How about build quality?
Yeah,
How about build quality?
And about the handling, if you corner with that one, it skids out
Yeah,
of the corner.
it's an
That
American
one-
car. They don't
that
do
one
corners.
handles.
They don't do corners. No, but you're actually making a very interesting point. How about build quality? So when I first started driving our car, I started getting a lot of people honking at me, not in a good way. I'm not sexy, so there you go. I had a broken tail lamp, and I thought at first that maybe just the bulb was broken, but it turns out the entire casing was snapped off. So the casing with the bulbs in it was dangling on the inside of the whole frame. If you all go sit a little bit more in the front and zoom in manually, here is the full set of steps that you need in order to change the casing of the inside of the tail light of the BMW Z3 1996. Are you ready? You just take it out, you don't even need a tool, just screw it loose, put the other one in and just screw it back in.
Easy.
Yeah, That was pretty nice. That I did not expect. Now my friend, he had to replace the antenna on his Chevrolet Corvette C4. What do you think? More steps or fewer steps?
More.
Way more steps.
You're gonna need 2 slides.
So here's a YouTube video, a guy on YouTube doing it. It takes 12 minutes. And he starts with, I'm fortunate because the wheel and the exhaust are already out. So, what was this car optimized for?
90, 80 movies.
Yeah, I don't think it was optimized for
Initial
maintenance. Initial build.
Initial build in
Yeah.
the factory.
Yeah. I think these days, if you ask mechanics, generally speaking, they don't like working on German cars because they fit perfectly. Everything fits perfectly, but if you try to get something loose, it's just not possible. There's no wiggle room. But of course, back in the day, the Z3 was a lot nicer to work on than the C4. Anyway, a completely random subject that doesn't have anything to do with what we were talking about. This purple color, it still stings me. We still have a mock in here in order to test that this client is doing its thing. And that is always going to be the case. But some parts of our code has to end up calling the client, and it's not going to call itself. So let's force us to make the situation a little bit more clear. Let's say we're not just going to report on the product stock, but depending on what comes back from the client, we either have to update the price or take the product out of circulation. We left ourselves with this version, so we were just simply reporting and getting some data back. Implementing our feature request naively could look something like this. We get our response, and if we get one flag, we just say we update the price, and elsewise we take the product out. Now if you squint, you can of course see where this code has to be mocked, and it will be a little bit more clear on where our issues are coming from. So let's colorize before looking at our tests. I think it's pretty obvious. This code is making us have to mock and that kind of stuff. This code is just doing its own. So our test would look something like this. We have to create for our client this mock that would return this specific response, and then we can test to verify that our price is updated. And of course, in the other situation, then we can test that our price is updated. And you can imagine that as the complexity of this API would increase, if there's more behavior that has to go back and forth, then all of this will become more difficult to work with. So how do we solve this? Well, there's no problem that we can solve by adding another layer of indirection. We can take out the code that we had and just put a function in that would apply the update to a single product. That function is now fully unit testable, and the other code will still be integration testable. Cool. Our test suite would look something like this. Some simple code for the product update, and even more simple code, but with mocks for integration testing. There's all kinds of things that we could say about this still. But what I'm really trying to say is that the difference between integration and operation will help you make simpler tests, and it's a trade-off against your test suite in and of itself. How many files you get and how complex the other functions will be. So this is what the test would look like for the for the single product update. This is a very simple test, no mocks, no nothing. Here's the test in the case that we have to take the product out of circulation, and for full measure, this is what we ended up with. A bunch of functions that integrate and one function that operates. So that's what I wanted to talk about with you today. Here is a final summary of what we discussed, and my clicker is giving up. That was supposed to be not all at once. All design that we do is optimized for something. Even if we don't purposefully put choices in there, we still end up with some optimization. Our design is good to the degree that it achieves those goals. And we can experience certain symptoms from missing those goals. And those symptoms, you often find them in test suites. If you've heard of inverted pyramids or ice cream cone testing, ice cream cone suites, those are Google terms. The discomfort that you experience with those symptoms is a signal for you to make changes. And you shouldn't suppress those symptoms. You should fix the root causes. One way that you could do that, rather than the zero responsibility principle, which is difficult to talk to people about, is the integration operation segregation principle, which is simpler to talk about, even though it's named. And of course, don't choose the approach, but choose your discomfort, and the approach will follow. That was what I wanted to show you today. Thank you all very much.